Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're going to continue our coverage. It's January 14th, 2022, of the ongoing civil war taking place inside of the former state of Ethiopia, and we have continued information coming in about said conflict. Specifically, we'll start with some United Nations reporting that is coming out of the region, specifically talking about the recent casualties that have been caused by the indiscriminate use of ground attack aircraft and drones inside of the Tigray region. And we can confirm that as the United Nations reports that there was over 100 casualties over the last 30 days in drone strikes and aircraft strikes inside of Tigray. That number is actually much lower than what that number actually is. Again, the amount of casualties, the civilian casualties that have been caused by the use of ground attack aircraft and drones is probably much higher than what is even being reported by United Nations officials. And we have seen airstrikes all across the Tigray region, to include the capital Mekelle and many other areas where there are high civilian populations. And then you take that, compound it with the Anaconda strategy, and again, it's really a dire situation for those civilians living in areas in the Tigray region that are subjected to said airstrikes, and obviously the terror tactic of restricting food and supplies. There has not been United Nations food deliveries for quite some time now into the Tigray region. And again, that is due to the Anaconda strategy employed by the regime of Abiy Ahmed and obviously Isaias Afwerki. Now, with that being said, on the military side of things are starting to progress rather well for the Tigrayan Defense Forces. We have seen what we would call somewhat of a lull in the fighting, especially the intense fighting that we saw in the southern Tigray region, and obviously before that we saw the great Tigray defensive offensive that took place that seized control of Dessie, Kombolcha, and then many others further south. Obviously, this map has changed since then. But what we're seeing is the consolidation and the upkeep of the Tigrayan Defense Forces in those operations in which the TDF moved south, seized Dessie and Kombolcha, and many other areas in the Amhara region. The Tigrayan Defense Forces were able to obtain large amounts of weapons and stockpiles of ammunition from those areas. And many of those supplies that were captured, especially near Dessie, have since been transported back to the Tigray region and are being included in that continued mobilization effort by the Tigrayan Defense Forces. And now we're looking at 1 year in, or over a year now, since the fighting has started. And we would say at this point, the Tigray region has reached a full mobilization capability and continues to train and continues to field combat units. And again, the recent lull in fighting over the last few weeks, especially the decrease in fighting that has happened between the Abiy loyalist formations and the Tigrayan Defense Forces, has allowed the Tigrayan Defense Forces to re-equip, rest, and deploy additional units within the Tigray region as well. Now, with that being said, we're continuing to see operations in western Tigray as well, and specifically near the town of Shiraro, and we continue to see operations by the Tigrayan Defense Forces across the Tikiti River, and that's there. But again, those operations have not been as intense as some of the operations that we have seen in other parts of the conflict zone, specifically the fighting that took place south of Kombolcha and Dese. And that has allowed the Tigrayan Defense Forces to reconstitute units and allow some of those units to rest and re-equip and train up, and then quite possibly conduct further operations in the near future. Now, with that being said, the operations in Western Tigray continue. As I talked about before, we continue to see smaller units of the Tigrayan Defense Forces crossing over into Western Tigray. And in fact, we have seen some fairly sizable engagements between the Tigrayan Defense Forces and the Eritrean Army within the western area of operations. That's this area. And in fact, we are hearing that the morale of the Eritrean army located in western Tigray, specifically Humera and other areas in western Tigray, is extremely low right now. And we can also report that in the engagements near Shiraro, those engagements were successful on the part of the Tigrayan Defense Forces. And many of those Eritrean army units that were operating very close to Shiraro and the border areas near Shiraro have in fact been driven back by the Tigrayan Defense Forces after sustaining some fairly significant casualties. And furthermore, specifically in the western area of operations across the Tikizi River, we are also hearing about the possible withdrawal of some Eritrean units from western Tigray. Now, is that being caused by localized battlefield defeats? Is it being caused by the reduction of supply because of activities by the Tigrayan Defense Forces? That is quite possible. Again, we do know that the Tigrayan Defense Forces is operating in a rather unconventional, asymmetrical strategy in the western Tigray area. Again, focused on cutting off and isolating Amhara regional militia units in western Tigray, and also cutting off the ability of the Eritrean army to supply itself in some areas of western Tigray as well. But again, early reports, early indications are, in terms of the western area of operations, that the Eritrean army is pulling back in certain areas of western Tigray. One of those, obviously, was the cause of battlefield defeats near Shiraro, and then obviously some of those asymmetrical, unconventional warfare operations that are continuing in western Tigray by the Tigrayan Defense Forces. And again, it is possible that because of the ongoing losses and the reduced capabilities of the Eritrean army in terms of both supply and morale is a big factor. Again, a lot of these troops are of a conscripted nature. Again, they're for the most part being forced to be soldiers of the Eritrean military and are forced to occupy western Tigray. And again, from what we hear, the morale is very, very low for some of those operational units. Now, obviously, there are better units in the Eritrean army that could be used at some point. However, right now, for the most part, what we are seeing is the low-end conscript soldier being deployed in western Tigray at this point. We did see higher-end Eritrean army units deploy to the Tigray region much earlier in the conflict, specifically from some of its commando brigades. And again, those units did sustain casualties and were eventually pulled out of the Tigray region. And again, some of those units are actually utilized in some cases as regime security elements as well. They're very loyal units to Isaias Afwerki and the regime inside of Eritrea. And you cannot deploy those units for forever inside of a very hostile environment. And that is why we saw many of those higher echelon units within the Eritrean army being pulled out of the Tigray region after sustaining some fairly significant casualties. But again, right now it looks like we have what appears to be, at least on the surface, is a general withdrawal or the initial start of a withdrawal of the Eritrean army from Western Tigray. Now, of course, that could stop. We do have, obviously, still have the Amhara regional militias that would like to retain control over Western Tigray. And in all likelihood, it is very possible that even if those Amhara regional militia units receive an order from, say, Abiy Ahmed, from the federal military, the Abiy loyalist formations, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, it is still very unlikely that those forces would withdraw from Western Tigray. And again, that is the Amhara regional militia units that are operating in Western Tigray. But again, that's kind of where we sit right now in terms of the conflict. It sounds like, the Tigrayan Defense Forces were able to, at least on the surface, defeat a Eritrean force near Shiraro, and we are seeing those forces of the Eritrean army start to withdraw from the areas near Shiraro. Will they return? Again, hard to say. Obviously, those units could be augmented with further units if the Eritrean army wishes to press its activities near Shiraro. And at the same time, we continue to see the Tigrayan Defense Forces strengthen itself in Western Tigray, and we're starting to see now reports of the Eritrean army withdraw from certain areas of Western Tigray. Obviously, we're going to continue to monitor the situation very closely. We're also monitoring the indiscriminate use of air power by the Abiy loyalist formations against targets throughout the Tigray region. Again, that is right now the main tactic outside of ground attacks, which we're no longer seeing. But we're, for the most part, seeing right now, in terms of the Abiy loyalists, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, mainly utilizing the use of either drones or bomb trucks to drop ordnance on the Tigray region and continue its Anaconda strategy, but no major ground offenses at this point. We will continue to monitor the situation and report, and we will have more content very soon. Have a good day, everybody.